end, isn't that all what this is about? Living happy. It's about your life, your liberty, and your pursuit of your happiness. It's a rationally selfish pursuit while respecting your fellow man's right to do the same. So I hope that you seriously consider joining me and a growing number of people in championing the moral case for separating state and the economy. It's obviously a fight against government intrusion in our life. It's obviously a fight to protect our rights. But most fundamentally, it's a fight to change the dominant moral idea of selflessness, of sacrifice, in favor of rational self-interest. That is the moral case for separating state and the economy. Thank you. All right, I see a bunch of hands here. You have a microphone, or we're just speaking?
I'll shout out.
Okay, Dave, shout it out.
First of all, your site is wonderful. Thank you for creating it and doing the work to do it. I would recommend it to anyone to visit.
Thank you.
Secondly, I'd like an opinion.
Uh-huh.
Those of us that are older in this room, that have read Atlas Shrugged, more than once, most likely. Bill's a good example, myself, and there are others. We grasped the essence of what you were talking about from Rand very early, and it changed our lives. Do you have an explanation for why what was penned almost 60 years ago for all to read and appreciate, Objectivism and its moral philosophy of rational self-interest has seemingly been so impotent politically?
Well, I don't think it has been impotent. I think we would have been a lot worse off without it. I mean, that's obviously speculation. And we're talking about, so how many here are familiar with Ayn Rand and Objectivism? Okay, so quite a few of you. Thank you. I just don't want to have a face-to-face conversation without and leaving everybody else on. But I'm thinking Objectivism, Ayn Rand's philosophy, it's revolutionary, right? And making the moral case for separating state and the economy is kind of an outgrowth of that. But we're talking about something that is challenging 2,000 years and more of moral philosophy, of epistemology, of everything, right? And 60 years is a pretty short time frame in that context. It's terribly frustrating. I mean, I agree, and our lives are coming to an end. I'm not too far behind you. And I think sometimes I think it's helpful to look at the battle against racism and slavery here. Because that battle pretty much started with the Constitutional Convention and the 3/5 rule and things like that. That was a revolutionary thing in the first place to just get that into the Constitution. That was the first time in the history of mankind that anybody even dealt with the subject in a constitutional context. But then it took from 1787 till 1865 to basically get rid of slavery. And then it took another 100 years and I mean, it's even there today, but another 100 years to get rid of the Jim Crows and back up to the Civil Rights Act. And the Civil Rights Act introduced some other things that were really not that good. But we're talking about really long historical perspectives here. So what has happened in the last 60 years, and if we look at our politicians today, we may not agree with them, we may shiver when we listen to them, but there are quite a few of them that proclaim that they have read Atlas Shrugged, and then they withdraw, like Paul Ryan. Oh, I didn't mean what I said, and things like that. But it's in there, and it's in the back of their heads. They have these contradictions that I mentioned, right? They liked it. But then they have the morality of selflessness that they probably got in church or somewhere else, in their sandbox. And that contradiction is festering there, and I think that is to our advantage.
Okay, Wayne, who's next?
I agree with virtually everything you said, but the problem that I see is the one place I think you went off. You started right off by saying, as Americans, we accept the separation of church and state. And I don't believe that that's really true. I see an awful lot of shouting out there of America is a Christian country. We were formed on God's principles, all this kind of stuff. And that seems to be a pretty majority opinion. And as you said, because our philosophy flies absolutely in the face of religious philosophy, I don't believe people do accept the separation of the church and state as much as you think, and therefore you were kind of basing it on, let's copy this into here when we don't have the one to copy.
And I hear what you're saying. Well, I think I'm a little bit more optimistic to you. I agree that there are a lot of loud voices out there, but I think there is a huge, maybe silent majority that still have a reverence for the separation of state and church, And we know when you have these events happening with the judge here and there who want to put the Ten Commandments in front of the courthouse and things like that, there are plenty of people opposing it too. So I wouldn't be too pessimistic about that. I think that is still very firmly established in the American mind.
So I hope you're right.
Yeah.
And they're saying that religion is losing popularity, which to me is a very...
Yeah, so just a brief comment on that. And I think organized religion definitely is. I'm not sure faith is.
Yeah, well, yes. Faith and religion are
right, exactly. Because if you look at environmentalism, for instance, I mean, that's a religion these days. The facts disproves everything of it, but darn it, I believe in it.
Ken, and then who's next?
Why don't we just leave the Ten Commandments there and sell the courthouse?
Oh, okay, all right. So I think I had a sentence in there saying that we would only call in the government when there was some fraudulent activity and things like that. So, yeah, I'm a firm believer in limited government, but that there definitely is a role for government.
Are you familiar with the works of Marshal Fritz, Advocates for Self-Government?
No, I'm not.
He went and formed the Alliance for Separation of School and State.
Okay.
And he discussed separation of economy and state, separation of society and state.
Okay.
And so you should look into him.
Marshal Fritz, F-R-I-T-Z?
Yes. And he was a prolific libertarian and did a lot of good. And he also played with words to try and find the exact moral case to make.
Okay. I'll definitely take a look at it. So just to mention, on the website, by the way, I mentioned the separate what section where you have all the areas that should be separated. There is also a separate not section that has the functions of government that are valid.
How can you morally justify the continuation of Medicare, the phase-out? Certainly it doesn't work practically because people getting subsidies spend 24 hours a day wanting larger subsidies.
Yeah.
So the phase-outs never work in our favor, and there's no moral case for saying you trusted government, now government will be faithful to you by stealing from somebody else.
Well, I think there is a moral case to be made for the fact that whether you supported Medicare or not, I mean, we are in a situation today where there are people who, without fault of their own, are stuck with the system, and I think it would be moral to pull the rug out from under them. But I mean, the end state is non-negotiable, if you like. But there, in practice, we have to find a way of getting from here to there in each of these areas.
What section of the Constitution empowers Congress to deal with health at all?
I don't think there is any.
Then the 10th Amendment says it should not be done at all. And when we start applying the Constitution, it would be a hard cutoff.
Right. But the Constitution, is the political implementation of the moral creed of our country, which is really the Declaration. The pursuit of life, liberty, and the life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Constitution was a darn good attempt, and it has done a darn good job for the last 200 some years. Yeah, it's a slippery slope, and it's getting worse. We all agree with that. But it's not perfect. And they knew it was not perfect, because if they thought it would have been perfect, there wouldn't have been an amendment process. And I think if you go back to the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, I still think I have an argument or there to make that it's moral to phase it out. Exactly how, I can tell you.
Dave and Russ.
I would simply point out that the case for abolishing Medicare or Social Security or any of them, the moral case is precisely as you say. However, to do so and how you go about it is a set of political issues. And if you don't go about them properly, the fact that you may have morality on your side may be shown to be entirely irrelevant to the outcome. So if you don't go about it properly politically, the fact that you're right in trying to do something about it becomes moot.
But I think and I agree with you. But what I'm missing most in today's politicians is that projection of the end state. There is no vision. There is this pragmatic dealing from day to day with issue after issue. But I long so for someone who can come out with a plan and say, this is where we're going. Now let's discuss how we get there. And that may be 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But darn it, this is the end state. Because this is the moral scenario. This is where we have individual rights respected and so on. Okay.
Russ.
Yeah, I thought you did a really good job of making a relationship and a correlation between religion and your argument. The only thing I would take exception of is you use the stereotypical attack on Catholicism to make your argument. And so that ostracizes anyone who disagrees with the Catholic approach to Christianity. Namely, there are many Christians who would argue against the straw man that you proposed for their moral code, which was that almost all Christians accept government enforcement of their morals. And I would take exception with that. The government enforcement of Christian morals is itself immoral. It makes every Christian moral that the government is enforcing to be immoral. In other words, the parable of the Good Samaritan is only moral because the man's actions were completely volitional. If there had been a tax collector standing next to the injured person on the side of the road and had said, your money or your life, I've got to help this guy, that would be immoral. What makes it moral is that the individual was volitional. And so everything you castigated about Christianity was the use of force to achieve moral ends. I would beg that if you would entertain the fact that the volitional means don't contradict your argument.
Yeah, I'll take that with me, because it's a good point that if it comes across that way, that's something I should tweak. I'm not sure, though, that what you're saying is completely true. I mean, I agree with the volitional part in the sense that is better than having the guy with the gun. But I think if you accept, why do you give the guy something in the first place? Okay, you can do it for different reasons. You can do it out of rational self-interest. Maybe he's a longtime friend that you just like and value and you want to help him. But if it's a street bum on the corner, and you feel guilty and gives him some money, then that is the wrong reason.
The Good Samaritan, it was his greatest foe.
Okay, yeah, so there you have my biblical
Samaritans and
knowledge.
the Jews hated each other.
Yeah.
That's the whole point of the story. And so I understand Ayn Rand's arguments. And I think the sooner objectivists realize that by destroying the concept of mercy, they'll never be able to get to a certain heart of people. And so if they would entertain the concept of mercy, they might, attract a better audience, I would think.
So define mercy for me.
The parable of the Good Samaritan, that's mercy. The man made a volitional choice to help an enemy. And he had no one forcing him to do so. It was his own choice. It was his own choice to have compassion and kindness for an individual. I don't see what is immoral about that action.
So Anders, I think it goes back to your free will comment. It was the good.
Yeah, it was free will, but you have a free will to do to act.
Is that action immoral? I do not see how Christianity could be laid at the altar.
Okay, so
and slaughtered on those.
Yeah, Dave, if you know the case better than I do, maybe you can comment on.
I don't know the case.
Okay,
but I know this man, and he's making a good point.
Yeah, no, absolutely, yeah.
He's making a good point.
Yeah.
A Mormon bashing religion.
And let me come at it, Anders, tangentially.
Okay.
I'll start by saying, do you think Rand herself made a mistake by focusing on the issue of God rather than focusing on the issue of compulsive morality? Because what he is saying, while you and I would agree that sacrifice is morally wrong and repugnant, but the freedom to sacrifice, if you so choose, with what is yours to sacrifice, is entirely your moral call. And that's the point that he is making.
Yeah.
You and I would say, well, yes, it is your moral call, but you're making a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's yours to make.
Right.
And that's all that he is saying. It is yours to make. And I'm simply taking that one step further and saying that, I tried to make a case in my speech that the crushing blow that Rand endured when she published Atlas Shrugged caused what I can only imagine in a mind such as hers. And she lashed out. And she lashed out at things that my friend here just used the word heart to describe. Not mind, heart. And so if someone chooses to, with what is theirs, engage in what Rand would call morally a sacrifice and therefore evil and wrong, that's muddying the water. Because if you're choosing to do with what is yours, but it turns out not to be in your self-interest even though you thought it was, well, it's your call, and I can say you're wrong for doing it, but it's their right to do.
Amen, Brother Walton.
That's libertarianism versus objectivism. They're not the same.
Do you want to follow up, Anders?
No, I'm good. Let's continue the discussion.
I'm just curious.
Listening.
I'm just curious as to, politics is essentially getting like-minded people to change the rules or create the rules or whatever. And, whenever we're in a situation where things aren't going our way, we always have the challenge of convincing others. So other than having a website and having great speaking ability and speaking to people who agree with you, how do we grow the thought process of that morality to the general population who just love to sit at the trough and get all that free stuff? Because now there's 49% of them who are just going to vote their interest every time. And they're way more self-interested than we are.
Right. And I share that frustration. And part of doing what I'm doing is therapy.
I love your honesty.
Yeah. Because whatever it is that you like to do, and here it's important you do what you like to do. I'm obviously not advocating that you should sacrifice and go out and do something for the good of mankind or whatever. Find something that you're passionate about and want to spend some time on. I found that writing for this blog as a hobby, kind of, because I'm a full-time employee, and I think that's many of us share that situation. That, in contrast to many on the other side of the aisle, if you want to say that, we have a life. But find something, because it is therapy, and that is a good thing, because at the end, this is about you living your life happily, right? And if you do that, the rings will spread on the water. You may not know where it takes root. And it's terribly frustrating because it's a long-term process. But I think we have to get away from this thinking of how do I convince the 49% or 52 or whatever the number is. It ain't going to happen. It's one person at a time. And you don't need a majority either to get the ball rolling. If you look at any movement throughout history, it's a few intellectuals that has started something and it has grown. And we're getting close to critical mass. There is a lot of people sharing our ideas these days compared to what it was 30, 40, 50 years ago. So don't despair. Find something to do.
I just wanted to respond to your advice. I think I'd give you, and I'd give everybody in this room, the same advice that Ayn Rand gave us. Shrug. Shrug. You don't have to carry the taxes. You can shrug and you can tell people that you're shrugging. You can always pay cash when you come down here and let people know why you're paying cash and not paying with a credit card. You can always try to accept cash and try to use cash. You can show people what it's like to get out of the system. You can shrug, and you can encourage others to shrug along with you.
Okay, again.
Let's see, was there someone else that had a question? Dave? Yeah.
Actually, could you talk a little bit about why sacrificing for an enemy is actually immoral and why it hurts your life?
Sacrificing for an enemy?
For an enemy or for anything that actually acts against your own interests.
Well, basically it is your life is the standard of your value, right? So you go through life and you establish a hierarchy of values that you try to reach, if you like. And every time you do something, you look at it, will this improve my life or will it not? And we make a lot of these decisions or estimations subconsciously, obviously. We don't go and explicitly ask ourselves this every day. But on that hierarchy of ladders, of values, I mean, helping your enemy, and we're talking about an enemy that will want to do you harm. I mean, it's anti-life. Why would you do that?
Yeah. And then,
yeah.
You got an answer for him?
Yeah. Your insinuation is that you're basically standing in front of somebody who wants to kill you, and your insinuation is you hand them the gun and say shoot. That's not the situation. The situation of the Samaritan was someone who would have been a natural enemy, was injured and lying, destitute, most likely would have died on the side of the road. The individual showed mercy. Now, if your conclusion is, at the end of that individual's recovery, that his only desire was to kill the very person who revived him, then I would say that you have a very low opinion of humanity, and I guess that's what you can have.
Yeah, okay,
but I would say that most likely the Samaritan won a convert, which is something objectivists could think about learning how to do.
I'm still...
I mean, when objectivists show up at my door in suits and ties with 19-year-old men, I'll start respecting your attitude about changing the world.
Okay.
In other words,
Right, but so I still have to read up on what mercy actually means. I'm not totally familiar with the concept, but I am familiar with the concept of benevolence. Okay? We're going through life. We're sharing this life on some level, all of us, right? And benevolence is a rational feeling. I mean, so you might, if I come walking down the road and there is someone lying injured, I don't know anything about him, I will help him. I mean, that's just man to man. That's the benevolent attitude, right? Maybe if I find out later that he would like to kill me, that could be. But so if when you say mercy, if what I call benevolence is something similar, then I think we're closer to agreeing than what we may think.
All right, Larry.
I think the problem is that all those things, the objections raised, the responses you've tried to reach, excuse me, are irrelevant to the economy. Basically, an economy is an attempt to institutionalize a way of engendering cooperation between independent individuals. That's really all that we need to direct ourselves toward, is how do we get cooperation? Do we get it through a pricing mechanism? Do we get it through force? Just what makes a moral case for cooperation? And what all of the problems that we have is that there is a lack of a basis for morality for cooperation. Okay? If you can get past the contradiction of forcing people to cooperate, okay, then I think you've solved many of the objections that are here. However, I don't think you can get past that contradiction. What you really need to boil everything down to is that if people want to get things done with other people around, you need to find a way to cooperate. And forcing and using force in all cases is wrong.
Okay. So, was there a question, or you make no? Okay, all right. No, that's fine. I just want to make sure that I didn't miss a question. So, okay,
cool. Well, I have a question, and Anders, you'll stay around for a little bit afterwards to talk to folks a little bit more. Be cool. The last time I saw you was actually at an immigration panel, and you did a really excellent job up there talking about immigration to an audience. It was at Colorado Christian University, and so it was an audience mostly you would expect of Christian people or faithful people, or call them conservatives, I guess. But you did a really good job of explaining in not objectivist terms what kind of a rational foreign policy would be. Could you tell us in just a couple minutes what that foreign policy would be?
A rational foreign policy,
foreign policy for a state, yeah.
Okay, so
not foreign policy, immigration policy.
Immigration policy.
Yeah.
Okay, so immigration or foreign policy. Okay, now we shift gears here. I have to try to remember what I said about immigration.
Just call upon all of your thoughts, being an immigrant yourself.
Right, an immigrant myself.
The immigrants
So the argument that I make for immigration is that the free movement of people, we should have free movement of people, just like we have free movement of products and services, right? And it's a fundamental right. It's part of our rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, just as it is to choose products and services. is to move wherever we want. Now, obviously, there are some minor limitations here in terms of if you're at war with someone. Yeah, that introduces some limitations. But absent those things, we should have free immigration. And I'm arguing that putting a stop to it and restricting people from coming in, it's really similar to racism. We're not putting up instead of putting up a sign saying blacks not welcome or only whites, we're putting up a sign saying only American citizens and those who happen to have a green card. So morally, we're shutting out all these people, preventing them from moving wherever they want, whether it's here or somewhere else. So that's really the argument for a free movement of people. Now, yeah, this is another scenario where you have an end state. You have a vision, an idea, and then you have to discuss how to get from here to there. And there will probably be a crooked path, but I still think that free immigration should be the end state. So.
Any other questions?
Yeah. Okay.
Go ahead. I'm going to go back to the topic of the conversation.
Yeah, thanks.
I'm struggling with how to formulate this, so Andrews, bear with me. It will be a question eventually. So, I am 99% in harmony with what you've discussed. I do see some problems between getting from here to there. Let me cite 3 examples. Number one is in food and food content, and how the government's involved in that. And I understand the interest.
Food content.
Food content.
Okay.
Let's talk about the FDA, for example. And let's move on to the second part, is like drugs. So there are a lot of drugs that they're evolving so fast, so quickly, drugs that deal with mental illness and diabetes and stuff. It's so difficult to check those out and make sure that they're safe. And I understand the interest in getting from here to the end game, like you described, but I see that as being a long end game, a big hurdle to get around. And the final thing then is, what do we do about the Fed? Because because the Fed's not even technically part of the government. So how do you separate the government from the economy and leave the Fed out of the equation? I'm struggling with that one.
Yeah, I actually had a breakfast discussion here a couple of weeks ago about that subject, and I didn't get an answer, so I have nothing to do there on that one. On the Fed. Now, on the food, though, and the drugs, I wouldn't be as pessimistic there, because I think the government has just taken away a lot of the natural processes that would take place in a free market. We're always thinking about consumers being subject to these drugs and they may get hurt and so on and so forth. But on the other side of the equation, you have your doctor, right? And yes, some of them are in the hands of big pharma and so on and so forth, but most of them are pretty decent individuals, and they don't want to prescribe you something that they don't think will be good for you. They may make mistakes. They can. But overall, on a free market. And then you have the doctors, and the doctors who may do you wrong a few times. There will be an organization who is evaluating doctors. I mean, we have it already today all over the web, what good, bad doctor. So those things, yeah. And we have kind of crowded them out because of all the government involvement.
Even with government involvement, we still have problems with that. Look at Ritalin, right? Schools are prescribing Ritalin to kids, not doctors, but the schools.
Okay, so there we have separation of state and
schools are taking kids and saying, this kid should be on Ritalin, take him to a doctor. Right. The doctor says, put the kid on Ritalin, the school said to. And they get a kickback from makers of Ritalin, and they also get a kickback.
So then you go out in the marketplace and you take your kids and you put them in another one of all those private schools that you have to choose from. Yeah. So but government education, that's another thing. And I bet you that there would be a lot less Ritalin use in a system of private education.
And wouldn't there be a market too for things like the FDA instead of having a monopoly over
we don't have a monopoly over it. You see these different kind of consumer groups pop up.
Of course.
And rate these different types of things.
All over.
So we don't need to house it in this one group.
You would have the independent consumer groups. You would have private licensing agencies, pharmaceutical companies wanting a certain licensing group or doctors group to, certify their product, and all these interactions that are just crowded out.
Is there another question over there? Come back to Ken real quick, and then we'll wrap up.
The model for what you're talking about is Underwriters Laboratory. It is non-governmental and voluntary. And if the FDA were deprived of its power to deny access to market forces, then they would have to justify their opinion in the minds of other people, and other groups could be set up to compete with them. We would have far more innovation. They do a very poor job of balancing what's the risk of doing something versus the risk of not doing something. And if it were shifted to a market voluntary agency, then we would move forward very rapidly. It's about half the U.S. economy that the FDA screws up.
Yeah, so there is no shortage of ideas out there if we're just allowed to capitalize on them. Okay.
Last word to you, Anders.
I just want to thank you for having me here. It was a pleasure, and I must say that you met all of my expectations in terms of asking good questions. I hope I could answer some of them, and we have got some good help from other members of the audience. I have really enjoyed this, and hopefully you got something out of it too, something that you can take with you and use in your own activism. And I'll stay around for a while if you have additional questions. Thank you.